Well, welcome to this roundtable. And this is a roundtable with three of my favorite people. I love me some Jake, and Abby, and Kevin, my business partner. And I am your host, Sheldon Primus. I have the Safety Consultant Podcast. So that's where you've seen me before. And I'd like to thank my good buddy, Jay Allen, who is the head of the Safety FM network, and also maybe we could call him, the tech guy today, because he is working behind the scenes, making sure that we're live and everything's going well. So if there's an issue, we're pretty much going to uh, blame it on Jay, right? Is that what? That's probably how we're going to do it. We're just going to blame it on Jay. So let me give you guys some expectations for this one. Uh, One of the things that we're going to really focus on as far as expectation is, since workplaces now in America are going to have to go live, some places they're probably, already out there. They've got customers coming in, workers are back to work after the times that we had with the pandemic. It's still going on if you haven't noticed, but in some workplaces, they are now going back to work. So America is truly going back. So we as safety professionals, we are not doctors. So I'm going to give you that disclaimer. Some of the things that you're going to hear may come out medical in nature because we're talking about a virus and a disease, but we're not giving you medical advice. So I want you to first and foremost, if you need medical advice, call that doctor of yours and talk to them and seek that advice. Other thing I want to give you as a groundwork is none of us are in sound studios, so you're probably going to hear some background noise from time to time, and just bear with us on that side. We'll be pretty good at making sure we're not going to answer phones or anything like that. Which reminds me, I'm going to turn off my phone right now, or at least put on mute, because every time I say that, this thing goes off. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on mute right now. And as far as the format, what we're going to do is I'm going to give us the nice 5 minute, uh, pretty much introduction, and that's what I'm doing right now. Then I'll do a nice little 10-minute of just my part, my thoughts on how to reopen safely. And then we're going to switch to Abby. Abby's going to give you her 10 minutes. And I don't know if Jay's going to help us out with timing on the group chat so we can look at that. If not, I've got my trusty old phone here with my cracked screen. And I'll keep my timer going. And then we'll have Jake. After Jake, we're going to have Kevin. Kevin's going to give us the OSHA view. And from there, what we're going to do is we'll also have a little bit of time to just, free form, just talk. If there's any questions that may have came up with any of us in our social networks, then we'll go ahead and answer those questions now. If something came up with any of us and we want to talk about it together, we'll do that. So we're going to respect your time and end promptly at 8, so that you guys can go on with the rest of your night and crack open whatever you're drinking, right? I'm not drinking. I've got water, but I'm not telling you you can't. And so that's up to you. So that's the ground rules. Again, we're going to talk about some medical things, but we are not doctors. We're here to help you as the safety officer, business owner, news reporter, or whoever is listening. We're here to help you kind of brainstorm just what we think that we would do and what we are telling our clients, because all of us are safety consultants. So that's why I want to do it as a host of a safety consultant podcast. So there's my 5 minutes. I'm nice and right on it, right? So what I'm going to talk about for myself, and this is I've been hearing this quite a bit. So I'm going to start breaking it down into pretty much the basics. So we hear about COVID-19 all the time, right? COVID-19 this, COVID-19 that. COVID-19 is the disease. The virus is called severe acute respiratory syndrome, COVID or CoV-2. So that is the virus itself. If we're going to go into basics of any of your safety controlling, any of your safety ideas, it's always going to break down to hazard, exposure, control. This virus now, and especially opening up America, is also going to bring another issue, and this is mostly diametrically opposed to safety, and that's production. Not all the time, but there's a sure enough time that production is going to really get you when you're the safety person and you're trying to tell somebody, all right, time to put on your full body harness and we're going to go up on this roof. And they're telling you, man, I don't have enough time. You're going to tell them, yes, you do have enough time. And we're going to train you. We're going to make sure you have the correct equipment. We're going to show you that it's a system with anchoring because we're looking at hazard, exposure, and all the controls we can do. So our controls again and safety truly is engineering, administrative, your work rules, and then your PPE. Everybody and their brother talking about PPE these days. I'm like, man, when's the last time you ever said PPE in your life? And now you're PPE this, PPE that. Just like, come on, people, you're all fake. But us as safety professionals, man, we know that stuff, and that's our bread and butter. And we just probably are keep telling our clients and keep telling everybody, PPE, last line of defense. If you could do an engineering control, all right. And a lot of you probably noticed the engineering controls that are going up in grocery stores or other places where there's a barrier, plexiglass barrier. All right. So that is a engineering type control. Admin control is your work rules, and then your last line of defense is the PPE. So back to my train of thought on the SARS CoV 2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19. So if that is the hazard, and we're thinking about exposure, so if the guidelines from CDC, if the guidelines from all the other professional medical agencies are telling us that we got to watch out for touching things, putting them, putting our hands to our face, to our mouth, um, then that's telling me that it is going to be ingestion and absorption that this virus is going to get into our system. And then if they're telling us respiratory droplets, so spit. They keep saying respiratory droplets. In my mind, I go spit. No one wants to say it when you're talking close to somebody. It's spit. So we're saying we're looking at 3 meters, and that's there's this 1 meter with 3 feet is what they're saying is close contact. So what they did is they put in a little buffer, and that buffer is called a safety factor. So all of the CDC guidelines is telling you 6 feet. So yeah, we're always used to safety factors in what we do in our line of work. Because if you're telling somebody, all right, I'm going to put you in a full body harness, lifeline, and a deceleration device, and we're only going to be up 11 feet. All you people in safety are thinking, yeah, this person's going to hit the ground every time because there's no safety factor, right? So that's the same thing with keeping your distance. So if you're going to start up your company and you're thinking, yeah, what's my hazard? What's my exposure? What's the CDC guidelines? All of those things are valid, but then you also have to think about how can I do these guidelines with production? Because if you're still not doing production, your company is not going to last. You're going to get pushback from the boss, and it's not going to work well for you as a safety officer. So you're going to end up having to think of several things. So one of the things you're going to think about is each decision that I make, and I'm gonna kind of go off over here because we have something called human and organization performance, and then we have something called behavior-based safety. So if we're telling people the virus is spread through respiratory droplets and through touching things and putting our hands to our face, so that's why we're saying gloves, that is a behavioral trait. The wearing of the gloves is going to stop us somewhat. The wearing of the mask is going to stop us somewhat. But then the engineering controls is going to be that human and organization performance tools. So the whole process, every kind of situation that you have is going to break down to some blend of this. So if I'm the safety officer and let's say I'm in retail, all right, retail, people are going to start coming in my shop. Most of your states are going to tell you that you're going to have some sort of occupancy that is going to be sometimes 25% for phase one of coming back into the actual working environment. Okay, well that means I physically have to look at my actual certificate of occupancy. That's going to tell me 25% equals X amount of people. My square footage of where I am, that means that I'm going to have not only the square footage of everybody that's working there, but then the people that are coming in. So you're going to have to think about social distancing on both ways, not just laterally. You're going to think of it, so think of it more of a circumference around that. And I don't like the word social distancing. Pretty much, I like the word physical distancing. That's the one that really makes the big difference, right? So that's one of the things. The other thing is what we call the touch profile, and we, as in me, I don't think anyone else called it yet. But if you're touching something, that now means that the virus is on your hands. It's protecting you if you have a laceration or something, a mode of entry. So, yes, you have some protection there. But the other thing that it's looking for, or I should say, the other thing that's taken into account right now is if you're telling your workers to wear gloves, that's a good thing. But now you have to think of where are they touching constantly? And then are some people not wearing gloves during that? Or what's the behaviors? So are they touching gloves right now and then they rub their eyes because it's really hot and you don't have a fan in wherever you're working? All right, you now have caused that person to introduce that virus into their eyes, into their mouth, into their nose, whatever. So that's another consideration that you have to think of. So let's do a touch profile, get all of your workers together. And then with the touch profile means tell me what you're touching throughout the day. We all come back together and then let's create a hotspot. This place is being touched more. Let's put a nice little station here that someone could put some Purell or whatever they need to for their hands. Or we're going to have a sign that says, wash your hands more here. So that's one of the ideas that I'm going to throw out at you. But anyway, with the other part, and this is wrapping up my section here because I think I got 3 minutes left, so ish. But what the other thing is let's say right now we know for sure we don't have the testing we need on the mass scale. So if someone is going to go into the compliance mode, like for me as a consultant, a lot of people hire me to stay out of compliance hard ways. They don't want to get cited. So now with some variants, and I'm sure Kevin's going to talk about this, OSHA's kind of grading on a curve right now with some of the compliance documents that you start reading. So that means that can't be used as a weapon anymore. However, litigation is still there. I'm not saying to use that litigation. I'm saying to protect your company from litigation. So you really want to think of the plan, do, check, act system. So if you're making any kind of changes, you want to plan it out with you, with HR, with upper management, with your union. And also, if you have any lawyers or legal representation, you're going to also add them too into that system. So now they're going to go through, we got some testing results back. All right, what do we do? Is this person going into quarantine? And where are they going to quarantine? Back home with the rest of their family? Or are we going to see if there's a local hotel that could take our people for quarantine? And then from there, we could start doing the protection. We're doing temperature checks when people walk in. All right, that's going to give you a result of something. So after you do your temperature check, what are you going to do? That means you're going to have something in place that says someone tests positive or their temperature is high. We need to have these certain procedures. So those are some of the things that you're really going to talk about. So that's my thoughts right now. I didn't give you like this conversation that we're having. I want everyone to know that it's not going to give you, the do all everything that you really need right now to get your company going. We're going to give you thoughts that you're going to have to think of, and you're all going to have to put it together in your group. You, safety, management, workers, HR, risk management. If you have a union, everybody all together. So that's the way to do this. So when we get back to the rest of the group, and if we have some more time later on, we'll talk a little bit more about this as much as we can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the member of the Safety Justice League, Abby Ferri, and she is Safety Justice League strong. So I'm going to mute myself and let Abby take over. Abby.
Nice. Thank you, Sheldon. And thanks so much for putting this together and including me as well. And just to introduce myself to the audience, if they didn't catch it, I'm Abby Ferri, and I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I don't really talk like that, but and I'm a safety consultant. So that's how I know Sheldon over the years when I was consulting on my own and now with a firm. So I have been looking at this whole reopening thing as it's a mindset right now that I've felt it over the past 2 weeks, really. And this week feels like people are antsy AF to get rolling. They want to get back to work. They or people that they're taking offense to the whole reopening term because they've already been working. And that's why I say it's a mindset that even if your job sites or work sites have been essential, critical, whatever you want to call it, it's been different. So things have been slightly different, but now people, it feels like they've been held back and now we're ready to just let them loose. And like we saw last night or yesterday with Wisconsin, that it's like, okay, go back, everything's on. And here in Minnesota, our Department of Labor and the governor have really been putting out some more tempered types of messages. And I don't know if anyone else has been geeking out over the governor's office here in Minnesota. They put out slides each week or most days for the governor's press conferences. And they're really cool. They're nice visual representations that tell a story, and they have a nice public health angle that I love as a health and safety person that's starting to dabble more in public health. I mean, we can't help it. We have to deal with public health no matter what our usual discipline is, because society and the world's issues right now, you can't just close your gate at your job site and say, no, COVID, you're not coming in here. This is a work site. It's all spilling in. So the Minnesota governor's office has some great resources where they take this mindset of turning the dials, that we've got these, I think it's 4 different dials, and we can turn them up or we can turn them down a little bit as needed, and that we're adjusting things. So the governor is almost giving like a class on how to communicate to the public. And so I've enjoyed it as a safety and health person and taking what he's talking about. So I'd encourage anybody, no matter where you are, if you're in Florida, wherever you are, hit up Minnesota Department of Labor website, or I've posted about it a lot on LinkedIn, and have included links directly to the governor's slides because they're almost beautiful. I mean, let's just call it that. I mean, sometimes you need some bright spots to look at in these times, and that's one of them. So on the theme of reopening being a mindset, think about that with your workers, that even though people may have been coming to work every day, or they never stopped working, whether it's at home or wherever they are, but that the mindset has shifted. And so we may have been really cautious for a while up until this point, and still want to keep moving on with caution as you reopen, whatever that looks like at your organization. It might just mean that certain operations come back online, or that there's more people coming, or however you look at it, you need to have a plan. And I was kind of laughing as Sheldon was bringing up some things, and I feel like we're probably going to make some people mad tonight, because we're just going to bring up more crap that they maybe didn't think of. And I say crap very loosely. It's just more stuff to think about, more things to put on your risk analysis or job safety analysis or whatever you're doing at your workplace. And it's tough. I mean, I feel it, in my organization. I feel it from other safety professionals that work directly at construction sites and manufacturing sites, that there's a lot going on. And I look at it from the consulting mindset of scope creep. We talk about scope creep, that a safety professional, you may not be a consultant, but at your organization, suddenly you're now head temperature taker and symptom checker. And you're keeping that list and that log of who's at work and why aren't they at work and how long have they been off and why are they off and things like that. So you have scope creep, you have extra things that you're doing for your day-to-day job, and it's making it difficult. So I I don't envy you if you're now a temperature checker for part of what you do. And when Sheldon talked about like the medical advice, and I think, as safety professionals, we're starting to get to like this line where it's like, am I like a healthcare professional now? People that are checking temperatures, you're reading a number, but what's going on with this? So I wanted to bring up the topic of OSHA whistleblowers. And there's just a quick plug for a future, yet to be determined what date it's released, but a future Safety Justice League podcast where we'll have Adele Abrams, everyone's favorite safety lawyer. And she just dropped a bunch of knowledge on whistleblower protections that safety professionals have and that our workers have. And so I know Keven will get into this sort of stuff because OSHA's his thing, but I wanted to just kind of plant that seed that safety professionals are doing these protected activities right now. So I think it's really important that safety professionals understand the ramifications of that, and that you're not just out there on your own checking temperatures, logging symptoms, and keeping track of people that are gone. It's all important work, but that you are also protected. So keep an eye on what your rights are related to that. I had taken a bunch of notes to get to some other things, but and Jay's giving me the time signal, stressful. But to bring it back to my construction friends, I see the scope creep happening with construction crews as well. That let's say your construction crew now, you were doing work in multifamily housing units, and you dialed back that work for a little bit while the coronavirus stuff was really hot and heavy. And now it's like, okay, we got to go back and do this work. Well, the construction crews may be asked by the clients, hey, can you do this deep cleaning before you come in, and do this deep cleaning before you leave, and do another deep cleaning next week before our people come back? So I know that construction workers, we have a get her done, or yes we can type of attitude, and you've got to talk to your workers ahead of that. Make sure that they're not taking on things that they shouldn't be doing. They're not remediating mold that's been sitting in HVAC systems that were in abandoned buildings when people closed their offices for COVID-19. So giving your workers that empowerment that, yes, we're reopening, we're going back to work, but we value your safety, and giving them that time, the materials to clean if that's something that's part of the work. If it's not part of their scope of work, you've got to have a subcontractor or someone come in and do that before your crews can go to work safely. So that was just kind of my bottom line stuff, is that reopening is a mindset. It might be a uniquely American thing, I'm not quite sure. And then also the scope creep, just step back a little bit. Like, I know everyone's really excited. Reopening sounds fun, but we have to dial it back a little bit, like Governor Walz talks about here in Minnesota, and make sure that we're taking care of our workers and still being proactive and keeping people safe and healthy.
Excellent. Thank you. That was a great scope creep. That's one of the things that is getting everywhere, isn't it? So we're gonna turn it over to the man, the myth, the legend, Jake Woolfenden, Summit Safety Group, the guru.
Yeah, that's right, man. No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm Jake Woolfenden, the owner of Summit Safety Group, and we work with hundreds of clients throughout the Midwest primarily. We partner with them to outsource a portion of their safety and OSHA compliance and things like that. And I'll tell you, Abby, I think you hit it really, really well with the fact that just really kind of bringing that term mindset back to it, because I really think that's what we're going to be battling over the next several months. For us in our area, we reopened pretty much the very beginning of May. And so to see what restaurants, what fitness centers, what all these places are doing or not doing is actually really startling to me. And so one of the things that we're really trying to push with our clients is, look, until there's a vaccine, we have got to take this seriously. I know that everybody wants to rush back to the old normal, but unfortunately, I really just don't think that old normal is gonna exist until there's a vaccine. And the reality is that for those of us that are in positions of authority, people that respect us for our opinions on safety and health, we too have to take this seriously. So I don't know if you guys saw, but Mark Cuban did a secret shopper thing and sent out to a bunch of different restaurants and businesses all throughout the community. And I think 90+% were not doing any of the measures that the local health department, CDC, was actually recommending. And the thing is I think, Abby, you kind of alluded to this, but it is very much it's an American pride thing that we can bootstrap this thing, we can get back to normal. But again, we're not dealing with it's right now, I feel like it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. We're dealing with philosophies. Even when I talk to my doctor friends, you know, they're like, why am I getting so triggered that nobody listens to me? You know, I've got, you know, one of my best friends is a neurosurgeon. One of the other guys, you maybe saw the video that I did several months ago when this thing first started hitting on the coronavirus, Dr. Trotman. He is like the guy for our state for all the epidemiology and infectious disease control, and had really been in contact with University of Washington and Seattle and people in New York, and they're just baffled when they have other doctors that are other professionals that bring in things that they see on Facebook, and they're like, guys, this is all debunked, it's not real. Where's your peer reviewed, you know, like where's the process? Follow the process, you guys know to do this. But because it's so out of sight, out of mind, people don't see it as a medical fact, they see it as a philosophy. I mean, how many of you guys know people that are directly impacted by this? Unless you're living in some of those hotbed areas, we may know somebody that's once or twice or third removed that maybe had it or something. And so it's very, it's not at our doorstep. And so it doesn't feel real. And so as we start this reentry back into just normal business, it can't be the same normal. The reason for that is because, look, we work with camps, we work with, we've got summer camps that are reopening, we've got all these these big establishments that you kind of wouldn't expect to reopen, but the governors of certain states have given the stamp of approval to move forward. But again, until there's a vaccine, you start to see cases start to spring up again, they're going to have to shut down. And so my fear is that when we're rushing too quickly into this, not being on the conservative side, regardless of what your philosophy is. I get it. There's a lot of different stuff out there. We can compare it to the flu. We can compare it. We can say that there's not actually as many deaths as we think there are. But the reality is that there are people dying. It's still a novel virus. We don't know everything about it yet, and we don't have a vaccine. So there's always going to be a subset group that we are going to be trying to protect, and that we should be trying to protect. So as businesses start rolling back in, the last thing you want to do is create this scenario where you didn't take the precautions. Now one of your employees gets sick. And I can tell you, we've seen this with our clients where they were not taking the precautions. They had a couple people get sick. Now they weren't being conservative. They weren't limiting the exposures to other employees. And they shut down operations for 2 weeks, sent everybody home. I mean, so what does that do from a productivity standpoint? You know, last week we got a call from a client that's a contractor up in Kansas City. They called and said, hey, we just had one of our subcontractors test positive. What do we do? Luckily, they were taking a lot of the precautions, and luckily it was a subcontractor that didn't have a lot of exposure. But what I keep telling everybody is you got to treat this like an accident investigation. If you go back and you start to see that there's so many exposures that you really can't even control, that makes your job so much more difficult. So one of the things I want to stress to other safety professionals and HR managers is please take this seriously, lead from the front, make sure that your attitude and mindset is one of protection. It's one of promoting health and safety for everybody, not just the people that, yeah, if you get it, maybe you won't get sick, but think about the people they're going back to. And it's a community thing. And it's very difficult for us, especially as Americans, to think about somebody outside of ourselves. You know, it's like the whole wearing masks things as source control, rather than, you know, thinking that yeah, you know, we could get into all that. But basically, I really just want to encourage everybody to really try to be as conservative as possible on this part of it, because the amount of work that you'll have to do on the back end when somebody at your facility or at your construction site does test positive is truly a nightmare. And when we're helping clients through that, trying to see who was exposed to who was exposed, you want to talk about a massive production shift. Send a ton of people home and then try to find people that can fill in those spots. Or, hey, this crew has been exposed, they've tested negative, but they can only work with that crew now. Like these 2 or 3 people are the only people that can work together on a project, and they can't be exposed to anybody else. Those are very real issues. And so again, the more that you can ensure that you're doing the things like checking temperatures, maintaining social distance, when you do have to work around very close proximity, like if you're working in an aerial lift with somebody or something like that, wearing a mask, making sure that you are truly protecting your coworker from potentially you being infected and spreading it to them. So it is definitely a mindset shift, and it's not easy at all. And lastly, I want to kind of just talk about the what we see as we go in. We're seeing so many more people being exposed to chemicals in a way that they've never been exposed to before. Tons of office staff. You've got we work with a lot of different companies, and so we work with banks and we work with people that really have very low exposures when it comes to OSHA. Typically don't have a lot of general industry or construction exposure, but now they have a lot of exposure and they don't understand what it's like mixing chemicals when you've got the rubbing alcohol or the hand sanitizer that's right next to the bleach, not understanding that mix right there will make chloroform, or you've got ammonia with ammonia and bleach. And then, I mean, so there's also, you got people that are applying all different sorts of stuff. You got people that are bringing stuff from the office, from home to their desk, to their cubicles. And that is extremely dangerous because as they're applying, you've got other people that are applying a different thing. They've got companies that are coming in to do the deep clean that Abby was just talking about. And so now you've got maybe a sodium compound that's being mixed with an ammonia. And now you've got some corrosive elements. And now you've got really expensive stuff in the office that's getting corroded because they don't realize the mix that they're actually creating. We're not seeing anybody really understand how to disinfect. They're not understanding that it needs to stay on the surface for a certain amount of time. And the only way that it's truly a disinfectant is that it stays wet. So just a lot of that stuff that, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of stuff that we're trying to do, some videos that I'm going to be putting out here in the next couple of days, actually, that's going to help try to bring some awareness to those things and bring some training. So I don't even know how much time I have left. I didn't see Jay write anything on there, but those are the biggest concerns. Taking people through very specific training with office related stuff, making sure that you as a safety professional are monitoring the stuff that's being brought from home, and that you're following the HAZCOM regulation, that you guys are making sure that you're getting all of those chemicals accounted for and that you're actually training them on that, and that they actually have an SDS sheet to show, and that they have personal protective equipment, they're wearing gloves, all that kind of stuff. So that would be the main thing. So kind of wrapping up, lead from the front, be as conservative as possible. Don't bow to the just kind of people just wanting to everybody's so ready to get back. I'm ready to get back. I'm tired of quarantine. I get it. But you have to realize that if we don't want this to be a major resurgence, where if businesses shut down again, it's not going to be for a month or 6 weeks. It's going to be for potentially months, and maybe not certain essential businesses, but I guarantee things like restaurants, bars, nightclubs, museums, fitness centers, gyms, stuff like that, yoga studios, it's going to be very difficult for those to reopen. And now we're talking about even more people out of work. So it's got to be a community effort. It's got to be us leading from the front, not bowing to that type of attitude that just says, screw it, whatever, just be whatever, do whatever you want to do. It's the same battle that we deal with production. It's not a different mindset. It's just a different element to that mindset. So yeah, that's all I got.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you. A lot of great thoughts in that one. So we're going to leave some time here for Mr. Yarbrough. Keven Yarbrough is ex-OSHA, 30 years almost, right? And also my business partner in Sheldon Safety. He made that up too. Is Sheldon and Yarbrough together created Sheldon Safety. So Yarbrough, take over. Tell us your thoughts on this one.
Well, thank you, Sheldon, for inviting me here. And I got to say, between yourself, Abby, and Jake, I think it's all been said. Jake is, man, you are one passionate guy. I'd like to have you on the stage with me when I do my presentations on safety. Man, all that energy, I like to bottle it up and take it home with me. But you guys did cover a lot of tremendous information. lot of food for thought. If this was the objective of the meeting, was to create food for thought, things to think about. Abby and Jake, you brought up some areas that I frankly hadn't even thought about. That's the benefit of getting people from different aspects of safety and different fields of the work that we do. My part is going to be pretty easy. After you guys, I get the easy stuff. I get to talk about what I did for almost 30 years. And as relates to COVID, I had the pleasure of talking to some people with the agency, and I was wondering, tell me about what we're doing, because this has never happened before. I know when I was with the agency, we had a program called the COOP, Continuum of Operations program, and it covered aspects of what do you do when your primary facility is no longer available, or where pandemics come around and you have to switch what you're doing. But this is on an unprecedented scale. So the question I had for my ex-compatriots or my partners in OSHA was, hey, what are you doing? How are you doing it? And how are you enforcing the rule? What is the rule? And I got to tell you, this thing was a moving target for OSHA for a long time, but they finally came out with a directive on how to deal with this COVID situation. One of the things that a lot of, Abby, you like to hear this, for construction workers, you're not going to see very many co-shows out there because that's not their primary focus any longer. The offices in Tampa and around the country of OSHA, federal OSHA, have shut down. No one's in the office. Everyone's working from home to ensure that they're safe, to distancing and that thing. And their primary focus right now are targeted industries like healthcare, long-term health facilities, nursing homes, hospitals, and that type of thing. So construction sites have fallen way down the list. Now, that's not to say if they see an imminent danger while they're responding to one of these not targeted, but high hazard industries that relate to COVID, they'll stop. But their primary focus is this COVID thing. So what is it? Well, let me just put it this way. They continue to do what they've always done. The exception is that they're not focusing on the industries they've always focused on. Jake talked about general industry and Abby talked about construction. Well, they're not going into general industry sites because as COVID, related to COVID, there are other sites that take precedence. Now, if you have a massive breakout like some of the plants we heard about, all these workers getting sick, now we're going to have to get involved with that. And to be honest, the way OSHA deals with that is very easy. When you have multiple people exhibiting signs of exposure, it's very easy to say, okay, this is work related. But if you have a facility where maybe one person or maybe two people are coming down with the virus, now OSHA has to prove, okay, is this work related? And how do we prove that? If it's one person, how do you prove that they just didn't get exposed to it in the general public and the symptoms only appear on the work site? So that's a very difficult thing. And Abby, you did mention 11C, and you mentioned that, Sheldon, you're gonna have another lawyer talk about that, but that is a very hot topic. And the 11C investigators are getting a lot of work because employees are getting smart and saying, you know what, I don't feel safe coming to work with all those other people. And I feel that it's threatening my life. And therefore, until you do something such as provide alternative means for me to do my job using engineering controls or administrative controls, I'm not coming to work. And then they get fired. Well, that's a classic 11C case. So the 11C investigators are very busy. So how is OSHA operating? I told you they're working from home, and what they're primarily focusing on are imminent dangers. Imminent dangers are important because that's a situation where nothing's happened yet, and we have an opportunity to save a soul if we can. So we'll go do that. And primarily that only happens on don't get mad, Abby, but on construction sites, because even Ray Charles can drive by a construction site and see a fall hazard or a trench excavation hazard or electrical hazard or motor vehicle hazard. So those are easy to do. They're also looking at employee complaints have taken a high priority. And in most offices, employee complaints drive the work. That's what you do when you're kind of caught up in everything else. You're going to be driven by employee complaints. And with this COVID situation, you can imagine the complaints are pouring in. And that had OSHA really kind of running around in circles. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Because as Sheldon knows, and I always preach it in my classes, OSHA has the responsibility of proving their cases. If they're going to issue a citation, they have the burden of proving that A plus B plus C equals D. And with this COVID, how do you show that? How do you show that? And the employee contracted COVID in the workplace. You know, what's the incubation period? They could have caught it at the mall and the symptoms just arose in the workplace, but the employee wants to file a complaint against the employer. Now, OSHA has to do the job that medical people should be doing, such as taking temperatures and doing the testing, which we're not very, very good at right now. So they're kind of like between a rock and a hard place. If they don't respond, then employees are going to send letters to their congressman and say, hey, OSHA, what are you doing? If they do respond, they're going to have a lot of people, a lot of resources tied up in this COVID, when at the same time, there's still other important activities going on. So that's one aspect of it. They have to definitely do fatalities. Now, what are we going to do if a person succumbs to COVID and they claim it was a result of being exposed at the work site? But now we're back to that circle. We're not medical doctors, or compliance officers not medical doctors, but they're going to have the burden of investigating that to determine where the exposure was. If it was at the work site, is it reasonable to expect this at the work site? Some of the work sites you may go to, like hospitals, long-term care facilities, nursing homes. If a person complains about COVID coming from those industries, well, OSHA is going to say, hey, wait a minute. Now, these are high hazard industries where it's a likely probability that they can contract the virus in this environment. So they're going to look at that a lot harder, and they're going to take that a lot more seriously, because it's a little easier to connect A plus B in those facilities. Then you have, as I said before, high risk industries, as I just covered, long-term care facilities, hospitals, laboratories, where they go in. If it's COVID situation, they're gonna lean to the side, well, yeah, this is probably a result of being exposed to COVID. Now, where the exposure occurred, that's a whole other ballgame, and that's gonna be another investigation. Okay, so that's what they're doing now. Like I said, how they're doing it, they're not randomly going out. They're only going out when they're called for complaints. And as I said earlier, complaints will drive an office. I know when I was the assistant director, we would get anywhere between 3,200 and 4,000 complaints a year. Now, with probably 26 compliance officers, you're just not, it's going to be very difficult to respond to all those complaints. So in the COVID situation, they decided that, you know what, based on our resources, we can't go out and look at every single complaint that comes out. So what they're going to do is they're going to put it back on the employer. They're going to do what's called the phone and fax. An employee calls up and says, I was exposed to COVID and I don't feel safe. They, depending on the facility, they may just send a letter and say, hey, Mr. Employer, we've received a report that employees being exposed to XYZ. Please investigate it. And within 5 days, tell us if you found that this was valid or invalid. If it's valid, tell us what you're going to do about it. If it's invalid, tell us how you came to the determination that it was invalid. And based on that response, that's when the area director or OSHA will decide, is this a case that's worthy of expending a compliance officer to investigate? So that's how they're kind of conserving their resources for the really, really difficult situations. COSHO's down, COSHO means Compliance, Safety, and Health Officer. I've called them COSHOs for years. There's no reason for me to stop now. Their primary concern, other than the safety of America's working men and women, is their own personal safety. So they've been trained on the COVID articles that have been written. OSHA's information has been written. They've been assigned to read a lot of the CDC, most of the CDC guidelines, and they're expected to follow those guidelines when they go into a facility. And if they can't, quite frankly, they're not going to go into a facility until something can be done. They may have to rely on PPE, where they're going to get the appropriate PPE to do what they have to do. Or if it's like in the hospital, they may say, okay, I'm not going into that room where an employer says they contracted COVID. Do you have similar rooms in the hospital that I can go into and make a diagram and look at it and tell me the operation? And then we can determine from that clean room what went on in that dirty room. The other thing is that they generally don't like to go into areas where there's patients, like long-term health facilities, because we don't maintain the dignity and the privacy of those patients. So again, they may go into adjacent room, or they may wait until the patient has gone to dinner or left the room, and then they'll go in and do their evaluation. The next thing is, besides their protection and the people around them, they're going to really be looking for engineering controls. This is a respiratory situation, so right away they're going to look at respiratory protection standard in OSHA. They're going to look at ventilation. What's your ventilation like? If you don't have it, what are you doing to get it? Is it feasible to get it in here? And FYI, OSHA says everything is feasible. So they're going to be looking at that, and they may even take issue with the fact that if you have a facility that could benefit from having either positive pressure or negative pressure ventilation, they're going to probably insist or even maybe cite you based on the fact that you have a facility, as Sheldon said, that has this hazard. What have you done to correct the hazard? And the answer, 99.9% of the time, we gave him PPE. We gave him PPE. Well, that's just not going to fly. And along those lines, as Jake was saying, really OSHA, well, let me just put it this way. Safety hasn't changed because of COVID-19. Hasn't changed. What has changed is the risk associated with doing nothing about this. We've had the flu, we've had situations in various facilities where you had to wash your hands, wear the proper PPE, have proper ventilation, but this COVID-19 has shined a bright light on the inequities or the failures of industries to do the right thing in terms of engineering controls. Very few people want to spend the money on engineering controls, and I understand it's not cheap to do engineering controls. It's cheaper to throw a respirator over them, and by the way, not even teach them how to use it. Just throw it on their face. It'll some magically adhere to their face, and they'll be fine. But no, they're looking very, very seriously at that section: respiratory protection, ventilation, engineering controls, and they've been directed to document the failures of not using engineering control where there was a need for it, and the employer just, for whatever reason, just decided, I'm not going to do that. Also, they're using the section of the OSHA standard, section 5A1, because as we talked about, this is such a new situation. The OSHA standards didn't anticipate this. It has some standards like the respiratory protection standards that we can use, but there's other situations where there's a hazard, but there is no written standard to address it. That's why the 5A1 section was developed, to identify a hazard, to address a hazard that the OSHA standards have not yet written a standard for. And to wrap up, the final thing I want to say to you is that OSHA has very high expectations for people in those targeted industries to protect their employees. Just throwing on a respirator is no longer going to be adequate. And the next thing to that is the training, as I kind of alluded to. Training is going to be very important. The documentation of that training is going to be very important. And is it effective? You can have all the documentation in the world, and if interviews show that the documentation or the training was ineffective, well, you may find yourself in a little hot water for that too. And that's simply because, again, the risk is very high now. This is an unforgiving disease and even fatal in some cases. So that's about where OSHA is on all this. Their directive is printed on the OSHA.gov page, and it's probably in the middle of the page, highlighted and bolded and underlined if you want to look at it. All right, I hope that answers some of your questions, and I'll give it back to you, Sheldon.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Well, we got some questions coming in. So one question was, how much emphasis is going to be placed on employee temperature screening using infrared? Uh, for usually, if it's an actual tool, what it breaks down to is how reliable is that tool. So, do they have validation testing, or if it's just a regular thermometer, that's fine too. But what I've seen with infrared, and this is my answer, the rest of you are going to have a chance to answer as well. But what I've seen is they've had stations that they will go up and they'll do an actual station with the infrared camera that's going you're walking through. So what that is actually the first stage, and then from there, if someone has a temperature, they're going to be separated from the group, and then they'll get another temperature taken for verification's sake. And at that point, the employer will have to have them decide. And in the U.S., it's going to be different. This is something that South Korea has been doing, and a few other countries have been doing. So for U.S., it's going to be different. Now, if a person's tested twice as having a high temperature, at that point, there shouldn't be allowed into the facility, though they've already had 2 to 10 days, and in some cases 14 days, where they were asymptomatic. So that's when the contact tracing and everything happens, like Jake mentioned earlier. So you really would have to go through that process. So that was one of the questions. Before we get to the second question, anyone else want to add to that?
I'll just say, Sheldon, you're absolutely right. Just, the temperature testing is fine. What we have to understand is that, like you said, is the tool doing what it was designed to do? Is it working? If it's working, is it giving you the information you expect to be given? Once you get the information, the person receiving the information, do they know what to do with the information? And thirdly, if they know what to do with the information, what is the response? How do they deal with this situation? Simply taking a temperature, someone comes in with 110 degrees, you go, yeah, you're burning up. Okay, go to work. Yes, okay. Yeah, I took their temperature, and he passes out on the assembly floor. You've got to react appropriately when you get the information. It basically comes down, are you getting the information? Are you evaluating the information? And what are you doing once you've made your determination?
All right. Anyone else?
Yeah, well, I was going to piggyback on that real quick and just say that, that's actually the case where you're going to have OSHA get involved, and you're going to have a willful type violation that's directly associated to the employer. If you're not taking that seriously, if you were to screen them, they've got a temperature at all, you allow them to continue in the facility, whether they've got the coronavirus or not. If there's some sort of, if it comes to be that at some point COVID does test positive at their facility, that I guarantee you is going to be brought back. And that is the type of very easy connection that OSHA is going to be able to make. And that's going to be right on the employer for, in my opinion, a willful violation, because you knowingly were using tools, you had things that you were there to employ to try to keep this from spreading in your facility. And then you had the knowledge that somebody had a symptom that is along those lines. And that's a very easy connection. So that kind of stuff you can't even mess with.
Yeah. And then it becomes easier if there's multiple people with symptoms at that workplace, because it becomes harder if it's only a one-off, like Kevin did mention. But when there become multiple people and there's people being tested and have positive temperatures with nothing, yeah, you're right. Abby.
Well, the only thing I would have to add to that is that I've already heard of companies doing the temperature screening and having a written policy about it and not following it.
Yeah, that's that's the Plan Do Check Act that I mentioned earlier. If you're going to plan your actual pandemic response, then the next thing you got to do is go ahead, let's put in this thing in motion. Then if it's not working, that's the check part, then we got to go ahead and redo this thing, rethink this thing. And then the last thing is let's go ahead and plan it again and release it again and do whatever changes we need. So we had one other question, which might be more of an HR question than one for us, but it says, does the panel have any advice to people who have lost their job due to COVID-19 related shutdowns or slowdowns? I had an episode about this in my podcast. First and foremost, get on unemployment. That's my opinion. You want to get money. Money is king right now. Get your money, get your paper. Do that first. And then from there, the next thing is, you're going to get laid off whenever for other reasons too, in most cases. So, get back out there. Don't beat yourself up. Start applying for something else. That's just my 2 cents. Anyone? We've got about 4 minutes left before we get to the top of the hour.
I've actually seen some people on LinkedIn where they put on their headline that they lost their job due to COVID-19. So maybe just like normalizing it and talking about it and somehow maybe capturing it on your job history. Or there's a lot of recruiter types out there. And another plug for another person who's been on Safety Justice League podcast is a woman named Tara Carbert, and she has an initiative she's called the Career Mindset Coach, and she does some coaching daily through social media for free. So there's a lot of people out there out of just marketing and kindness are trying to help people out that have found themselves in a tough position right now.
All right. Anyone else?
I don't have anything on that. I do want to just come back real quickly to the temperature thing. I think what happens a lot of times in those situations is, we're constantly being fed the negatives. What doesn't work? What have we found that, oh, well, people have COVID-19 that never even get fevers, so why take temperatures? Or by the time they get a fever, they've already been, they've been asymptomatic, but they've been contagious for the last 2 weeks. So why are we taking temperatures? People have to understand that that's just one tool in the toolbox, and it is an indicator in a lot of situations as to somebody being sick. And to the point that that Kevin was making earlier, this is going to be a mindset shift for us moving forward, even in things like the flu, any of those types of illnesses. And it should be, because when we talk about productivity, that stuff matters. And we got a bunch of people sick during flu season. It doesn't help anybody. So I think starting to get some of these things, realize that it is a new normal, that it's good to adopt some of these things as we move forward. And it's just one tool in the toolbox. I think you've got to take a really holistic view to make sure that you guys are covering all of these things, and don't let the negative stuff impact you or keep you from doing or employing safety measures that really are going to be important in this whole thing, especially as companies are reopening.
All right, excellent. Well, I like to thank all my panelists here, and just for everyone, if you need to get a hold of Jake, you're going to go to summitsafetygroup.com, right, Jake? Summitsafetygroup.com. I see his head nodding. He's got his cool head nod going, man. That's the cool cat right over there. So you get the cool head nod. So summitsafetygroup.com, and they also have online training too, and their online training is excellent. You just got to go through that. They have it in English and in Spanish as well. So go ahead and look him up. Abby is with the Safety Justice League, and I don't know if she's given herself a moniker yet, but she with the Safety Justice League. So just go ahead. You can listen to them on Safety FM, and I'd like to thank Safety FM Jay for hanging out with everybody, helping us, working everything out. He's been awesome. So download the Safety FM app if you haven't yet. Do it. And Keven Yarbrough is with Yarbrough Safety Solutions. So you want to go to Keven Yarbrough, Yarbrough Safety Solutions, get him on LinkedIn, and you can go to linkedin.com/in/Keven Yarbrough, and it's Kevin with Keven. So Keven Yarbrough. All right. So outstanding job, Safety FM. Thank you, everyone. And I really appreciate it. And me again, your host, Sheldon Primus for the Safety Consultant Podcast. Look me up on safetyconsultantpodcast.com and listen to me on Safety FM. Thank you.